I'm Leah Simpson with Nurturing My Nest, and today we're going to tackle bread making. I have been making bread for my family for over 20 years, and I'm going to show you two ways to do this. I think either way would just be so exciting for your home, but I want to make sure that you can gather the ideas that work best for your family. So I will say, before you start cooking anything, and especially bread, because it is going to take a little while, it's really not hard. Bread making is not hard, but it does take time. So I actually start bread making first thing in the morning, and when possible I set out everything the night before, because it takes a few minutes to set things out. One of the things I would suggest is to grab something really yummy that you like to drink. In my case, I have some fresh coffee, fresh ground coffee, in one of my favorite mugs. I love pottery, and I have a friend here who makes pottery, and this is a mug by Wes. And anyway, makes me happy. Fresh coffee. It's got extra milk in it, and it has some cinnamon on the top, and it's just really good. So whatever you like to drink while you're cooking, you want to grab that. You want to gather your ingredients, because you do not want to be into the project of making bread and finding out that you are missing ingredients. That is very stressful, and in my case, I usually start calling my neighbors. So here are the things you need. This is simple. I think you will need yeast, and many people ask about the yeast. If people are missing one ingredient and they're not sure about it, it's usually the yeast, and this is what I usually buy. I buy a pack of yeast. This is a pound, and it's really airtight. It comes in a square. I'm not really picky about the brand, but I like to get this size from the store or from my Mennonite friends and put it in a container that is airtight, and I'll store it in this container ongoing in my freezer. Now, one thing that's kind of fun is I have these really cool measuring spoons, and these are actually from my childhood, and they just make me happy. I know there's always things in your home that remind you of your childhood. My childhood was very happy. I hope yours was. But these are just things that I used to bake and cook with when I was a little girl. So those are in there, just like a little side bit there. So you want to gather up flour, and we're going to do two different kinds of bread today. We're going to do bread that is made with white flour, and we're also going to do bread that's made with fresh ground wheat flour. So we're going to start with the white flour first, because I think that's what most of you probably can easily find in your home. Salt. This is a salt here. I'm not really picky about it. Salt is salt. You don't need that much anyway. This is local honey here, and also olive oil. So I've got this in a container that I like, and it's easy to pour. You're going to need about 2/3 cup of olive oil. Now, we're going to show you how to do the bread here at the counter, but I will say that one of the places that I hide this recipe is on one of my cabinet doors. Your hands are going to get very dirty in this process, so you might want to put the recipe on the door of a cabinet, which is maybe eye height, and open that door and let that door hold your recipe card. That's how I've done this for almost 20 years, because I'm always checking my percentages, although I pretty much have them memorized. But it's a good way to keep your hands from touching your recipe card. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make our water hot. You want to go to your tap and turn on your hot water. Some people measure the temperature in the water. I don't. I am cooking by touch. I cook with my hands, very clean, of course. One thing to do is make sure you do not have rings on when you're doing this. And the reason why is because you're going to have your hands in dough here shortly. So I'm letting the water here get to the right temperature as it's heating up. And I just want to mention what you want to do with this recipe that you'll be seeing in just a few minutes is to write it on a small card. Now, you can use any size card, or if you don't have a card, you can just grab a piece of paper. But this is the card that I have used for pretty much from the beginning on bread making. I've been making bread for about 20 years. But this is the bread card. It is lined. It's a recipe card that you put in a recipe box. But you can use anything. You can fold up a piece of paper, use a 3x5, 4x6, whatever you have. So you want to put this near your area that you're cooking. So the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is make sure this is very hot, which it is. It is very hot. And I don't want to splash my water, so I'm going to turn it down a little bit. And I am going to measure off 6 cups of very hot water. All right, now the water is very hot, too hot to touch really, and I'm going to set this back on my bread making machine. Now, as I said, I'm going to show you 2 ways to make these bread loaves, and I will say this is a machine that I've had for over 20 years, never had a repair on it, and it's really wonderful. It is more expensive than the traditional KitchenAid machines that you find in most kitchens, and you can purchase this one online. It's fairly easy to find, but if you are going to do wheat in your bread, wheat flour, I'm going to show you how to do that in a few minutes, you're going to need this machine. This is a Bosch, and I mention that because it looks probably different than what most of you have in the kitchen. All right, so we're going to take the yeast, and I am going to measure off, check in my recipe here, 3 tablespoons of yeast. As you can tell, I measure most things, but it's not, I'm not going to be overly nervous about measurements. If you are new to cooking, I'll tell you, this is one of the easiest things to make that will be successful, okay? So don't worry too much about measuring your water temperature or being exact on all these things, okay? This is your yeast. Now, this is yeast and warm water, and before I start my machine, I am going to add about a cup of flour. This is white flour, all-purpose white flour. I like Pillsbury brand, but use what you've got, use what you like. I'm going to put the top on all of these things here. The flour, this is going to stand over here because I'm going to need it in a minute. I will actually make 3 batches of this recipe when I make bread. And the reason why is because it makes 4 loaves every time. I have a big family. And the other reason is it's so fun to share. So a batch makes 4 loaves. And you've got the flour, you've got your warm water and the yeast. And I'm going to turn it on here. I've got to get the top. Be right back. You do not want the water and all of what I just put in there flying all over the kitchen. So here's the top. As you can see, I'll show you in here, it smells really good. I wish you could smell it, but it's just the yeast and the flour and the warm water. And I'm going to set the timer for 15 minutes because I need it to bubble, and I need the yeast to be active and start working in this bread. This is a good time to set your pans up. I have been doing this for 20 years, let me just tell you, so I have been collecting pans. And as you can see, they are not identical. Probably all of us have loaf pans. This is one of the ones I had originally. It's a Pyrex. I love these. My favorite one has gotten broken. I will not tell that story, but it was broken. It was a glass one that had a non-stick surface. If you have one of those, it is a treasure. You should not get rid of it ever. But glass is great. I love glass, so you could use a glass pan. These are pans that I bought from the grocery store. They're considered baker pans, and they're okay for a while because they are less expensive. They're less quality, and when they start to have anything that they don't stick, I throw them out because I'm feeling like the surface is peeling. So I have a couple of those. A friend of mine gave me this one. And it's a really great non-stick. It's a little funny in the shape. Again, some of the pans that I spoke of before, I got this at the grocery store. The reason why I had to buy them from the grocery store is because I needed so many. I actually have 11 pans right here, and I'll explain why I don't have 12. This is another one. Usually I like to buy pans from a kitchen store because they last forever. They never have to be replaced. So while you might buy a pan for maybe $10, somewhere inexpensive, you're going to be replacing those pans. And in my world, probably I'd say every other year, I'll replace the bread pans. And this one, for example, these 2 were given to me by one of my students. I have taught writing for many years. And these are really beautiful pans. And I guarantee you, she probably paid about $20 or so for these. So these are great to have. Like I said, you have to kind of collect pans if you make 12 loaves. These are really big. And these are from a Williams-Sonoma outlet. And I wish I had more of these, but I also wish that they were this size. And I'll tell you, this size right here, these three right here, take up a batch. So where I will make 4 loaves with my other batches, one batch will go into these 3, and they'll make 3 loaves. And they're beautiful, and they're big, and they're wonderful, and we like to share them. One thing that's really important when making bread is that you have the bread rise enough to give it a really pretty top. And you'll see that in here in a few minutes. So what I'm going to do right now while I'm waiting for the water and the yeast and the flour to look foamy is I'm going to take all of these over to my kitchen counter, actually my glass stovetop, and I'm going to set them out and I'm going to spray them. And the reason for that is I want perfect loaves to come out as we make this. So these are all going over to the stove, and I'm going to set them in groups and get ready for 3 batches of bread. First thing we want to do after the timer goes off is to look at our bread situation here in the bowl, and you can see it is sort of foamy. When you're looking here in the bowl, you can see that there's a foam layer on top of the warm water, and that means that your yeast is good. Sometimes this is very, very foamy, and sometimes it looks like this. And I will say that that is different based on the flour that you use, also based on the temperatures. Like today, it's pretty sunny outside, and it's not really raining. So if it was raining or if it was winter, it would just look different. So don't expect the same thing. That's the one thing about cooking that you should experience, is that things do change and it's not exact. All right, so the next thing that I'm going to do is put 2 tablespoons of salt. Remember, if you're like me and you want to limit salt in your food, that this is actually going to produce 4 loaves of bread. So you are putting in a half of a tablespoon really in each loaf. And if you read the ingredient list on any bread at the store, any bread loaf, you will be dismayed at how much sodium is in the bread loaves at the store. And I will say my motivation for making bread for my family, because it's a lot of work, is the fact that I want to nurture my family by making fresh homemade bread, because there's just something just amazing at having a counter full of kiddos like I used to have. They would actually bring their schoolwork and sit at the counter waiting for the bread to be ready so they could eat it, and have no doubt a whole loaf was devoured within moments of coming out of the oven, because I had 5 children homeschooling here. But the other reason why I think making your own bread is really great is because it's very nutritious compared to what you can buy. So, all right, so we're going to put the 3 items in here really quickly before we talk about the flour. Next, we're going to add the olive oil and the honey. This is a tip. We need 2/3 cup of both oil and honey. So I'm going to start with the oil, and I'll show you why. I do not know where my 2/3 cup went, so we're going to use the 1/3. Keep that in mind. And so this is a 1/3. And so I'll do 2 of them. Now keep this little bowl here because this cup is messy. I'm sort of a cleanie, and I don't want to have that on my countertops. I'm opening up a new honey here. It's not too bad. All right, so here's the honey. This is going to be messy, but because we have oil in our measuring cup, it's not as messy. So this is another 2/3 measurement, 2/3 honey. So we did 2/3 oil and 2/3 honey. One little thing I do that probably wouldn't be a good thing to do today is I do keep a kitchen towel close by, and if it's just me and not the camera, I will usually throw this over my shoulder because I'm constantly washing my hands. So that's just a little friend-to-friend tip here. All right, so we're going to put the top back on the bowl, and I'm actually going to put this one on here for a minute because I'm going to mix up all the wet ingredients with the salt, the olive oil, and the honey. All right, right, this is where my my desire not to measure all the time is going to be a little tricky. So I'm going to give you a couple clues here. The measurement for the flour is normally somewhere between 12 and 14 cups. But I find that flour and bread making is very affected by the altitude at which you live and the temperatures in the season, and also just what's going on. Like if it's raining, if it's humid, if it's dry, less flour, more flour, it's all going to be relative, okay, to your environment. So what we're going to do is I'm going to leave this on here, this piece, because otherwise we're going to have a mess. And I'm going to begin adding the flour. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the dough that's going to develop in this mix to pull away from the edge of the bowl. Now it's very important that I don't put too much flour in here or it's just not going to taste great. Believe me, I've tried. I've made a lot of mistakes with bread making, even after I've been doing it for a while. So I can tell you that if you put too much flour, you're not going to like the bread. I mean, it's edible, but we're going to try to make it really yummy. Okay, so we're going to begin, and I'm going to put about 12 cups. I'm getting close to having just the right amount of flour, and I'm going to put this in gingerly because if I do it too fast, literally the dough will just come out of the machine. I've had a lot of experiences. That one was very concerning. So you can see inside, if you're looking in the back here, that it's almost completely pulled away from the edge of the bowl. It's not perfect, but the reason why you run the dough hook for so long is you want to put as much air in the bread as possible. There's different kinds of bread, but this is going to be a very fluffy bread, so we want a lot of air. You can do this kneading thing by hand on the counter, but I'll tell you, it will take you a long time. I've done that before. It's about 20 minutes or so of kneading, which might not sound like a lot, but it's a long time. This is a messy proposition, so I'm going to show you that I have a lot of counter space here, and I probably am going to get very dusty. So at this moment, I'm going to go put an apron on. Otherwise, it's going to be all over my clothes. I have my apron, so we're ready to roll. The next step is kind of messy. I have very carefully cleaned the countertop where the bread is going to go. And right now, keep in mind that the dough here is going to create 4 loaves. I was thinking about doing a bread recipe with only 1 loaf, but then that's kind of silly, right? Because it doesn't take any time to eat 1 loaf, and then the excitement's over and you have to start again because your family's asking for more. And I like to make a lot of bread when I do it because it's just so fun to share. I mean, think about this. You cannot buy this kind of yumminess at the store. I don't even know if you can order it. At least around here you cannot. So it's something that you can give people as a great gift. Now I've taken the dough hook out of the machine and I am dumping this dough onto the counter. It's actually pretty heavy. I don't know how heavy it is, but it is a little bit heavy. I just need all of it to be on the counter, and I don't need it to land on part of the counter that does not have flour. And the reason why is because, as you can see, it's very sticky. I don't know how to explain this, but using white flour, it's just so sticky. So I'm actually going to put my hands in the dough here. If I was working in a kitchen where I had to serve the public, I'd have to follow a few more rules, but I'm going to use my hands. I'm one of those people, I just cook with my hands. That's why you shouldn't be wearing rings when you're doing this sort of thing. You actually might lose your ring in the dough. I guess if the bread ended up in someone's home and they found a ring, it'd be like a surprise, right? All right. I'm going to get a spatula to get the rest of that out. All right, this is some pretty dough. This is some pretty dough. Your hands are going to look well, they're covered with all the wet dough. The dough's going to stick to your hands. You can expect that. And all I'm doing right now is just trying to make sure I can get control of the loaf. If you are kneading by hand on the counter, you do something like this. But I've done this a lot of different ways, and I'm just saying the machine can knead for you. Now I'm going to tell you, I have a friend named Catherine Barnhart who showed me how to do this some 20 years ago. And this is just a cute little idea. I divided the loaf, I cut it in half with my hands, and I have it in 2 loaf sections. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this into just a ball here. And my friend, she and I both had a lot of children. She had 6 and I had 5, and she'd say, you know, it's just like a baby's bottom. It's just real pretty, and when you know it's like that on the outside, it's going to be a beautiful loaf of bread. So I'm going to go ahead and put this first loaf in a pan so it can rise. I have a loaf here. It's this section, this was divided into 4 parts. And so I'm going to keep turning it in to the middle, and we're going to have a beautiful loaf of bread here and lay it into the pan. You can see it's a little bit oblong, but just imagine this when it's the loaf has finished rising, and you'll be able to see even the marks that you leave there on the pan. So it'll be a beautiful loaf. I'm laying it into the pan right now, and we will get the next section. So you just squeeze it down the middle. They're usually pretty even. Just play with it. It's kind of fun. It smells yummy. It's really warm in your hands. It's just those little things. You know, you're like, oh, I just love making bread. I always feel that way when I make bread. Just so much happiness. I'm going to bring the pans over so you can see this is one batch. And this batch has been made with the white flour. So these are the pans we're going to watch for the white flour recipe. All right, we're going to put 4 loaves in the top. This is the white flour batch. I put them in very slowly because I do not want them to fall. As you remember, the yeast has made them fluffy and has put air in them, so we don't want them to fall after they've already risen. Some recipes actually call for 2 different times for the bread to rise, but this recipe only needs 1. I'm not sure I'd be patient enough to do it twice. And if you use this recipe, you only have to do it once. Sometimes I have to scoot the loaves over. I thought I had it in right, but these, of course, don't do this if they've been sitting in here for a minute. They'll be hot. As you can see, your loaf pans don't have to be identical. I don't care who is at your house. They probably want to sneak a peek at the bread as it's baking. So I'm going to take these cloths down here and I'm going to turn on the oven light so we can watch them bake. It's been 35 minutes, so we are ready to, as you can see, take the bread out. Both of these ovens are ready to go. This is the set with white flour. Actually, they're taller now that we're pulling them out than what they were when we put them in. So they were rising while they were baking. Isn't that beautiful? You have to go very slowly, though. You do not want them to, again, collapse. I wish you could smell these because they are so yummy. Well, we have our first batch of bread out of the oven, and this is a beautiful loaf. I would say it's perfect. It's going to taste even better, I'm sure. And this is something you can make at home with white flour and olive oil, fresh local honey. And while the bread was baking, we gathered up some of our jellies. We've got fresh butter, honey. This is a honey butter concoction my husband put together because he likes it and it's really yummy. And then we've got some mango jelly, some blueberry jelly, and some strawberry jam, and it's going to be awesome. We could wait for the bread to cool off, but then isn't the point of making homemade fresh bread to have it hot out of the oven? I'm going to use hot pads because this is very hot, especially the pan. So as you can see, the loaf is going to come out perfectly. Let me show you why I prefer whole wheat bread over just white bread. And here are some of the things that I learned many years ago about the flour. This right here is the whole grain wheat, and I'll show you the whole grain in a minute. And this is the bran, this is the middlings, this is the wheat germ, and this is the wheat germ oil. And all of these things are things you're going to keep in your wheat flour. I'll try to show that to you as we grind it. And if you are going to use white flour, and it's example over here on the side, all of these things have been taken out of the white flour. So if you want to maximize the nutrition as well as the yum by making bread, you might consider making wheat flour. And I will say this, if you are going to do bread in the way that I always do bread with a whole wheat flour, you really need to order grain in a bag. If you go to the store and you buy whole wheat flour on the shelf, it's likely to have bugs in it, for one, and it's not very fresh. Because it doesn't have preservatives, it will spoil very quickly. If you make whole grain flour with your machines and you have extra, let's say you're making bread and we have extra, you want to put it in the freezer right away because it doesn't have preservatives. And that's one of the reasons why we love it, because it's just very fresh and close to the source. All right, so let's talk about the wheat flour. This is the big wheat pail that you saw on the floor behind me. And I have a bowl here, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the lid off. This is actually a Gamma lid. You would buy it separate from just the pail, and it's fabulous. It's wonderful for keeping everything fresh. So it's a Gamma lid, and I'm going to pull this off, and I'm going to get in here and pull the wheat berries out. This is what they look like, and I'm getting ready to fill up this bowl, and then we're going to grind the wheat berries into wheat flour. These are the red wheat berries, and I'm going to grab my kitchen cloth, and because if I don't, we're going to have lots of flour coming out of this area here. Now, a funny little idea that that you might notice on here is that this is called a whisper mill. I've actually had these machines for 20 years. They are fabulous. They are a bit of an investment. So I'm not sure what they cost right now. I know what they cost when I invested. So this is a whisper mill, which is not quiet. It sounds like an airplane landing in your kitchen. So I'm not sure why they called it that. It is connected here to sort of like our flour pail. So I'm going to put wheat berries here, and I always turn it on first because I have found out that if I don't turn it on first, the wheat berries might get stuck. So here we go. It's going to be very loud. I'm putting wheat berries in here, and it's going to come into this pail here, and we're going to have some beautiful flour. Here we go. If you have never used these machines before, I found that if I fill this up with wheat berries here to the top, almost to the top, it will fill up this container. If I keep adding, it's going to have too much flour. So right now we're going to let it work its way down. And if you're bored, you can play with the wheat berries. They're pretty great. And it smells fabulous. So much for it being a whisper mill. And we're going to look at the flour, pull our top of our cloth off of here, and I'm going to pull it out of the machine, and I'll show you what it looks like here. Because I'm going to do this several times, just try to knock all the extra flour off and lay it up there. And this is what you have. It's beautiful flour, and if you can look at it closely, you will see a lot of the things that we talked about as we looked at what is different about wheat flour versus white flour. You can see the wheat germ in here, and really everything that was part of the wheat berries, everything that's part of the wheat berries is now in your flour. We're not going to put anything in it. We're just going to put that directly in our bread, so we have all the nutrition that the wheat berries offer. We are working on adding ingredients to our warm water, which has yeast and just about a cup of flour. That's how we got started with it. It's bubbling, and it looks really pretty. Foamy, I guess I would say. It's not actually bubbling. But I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of salt. Keep in mind that this batch will make 4 loaves of bread. I used to put a little bit less salt in, but my husband requested a little more, so I used 2 tablespoons. You can change that based on what you would like. You can use any kind of salt, your favorite. All right, now we're going to put the oil and the honey. Now, just to keep things working smoothly, I actually have a bowl here under my measuring cup, and I'm going to add 2/3 cup. This little cup is actually a third, so I'm going to add 2/3 cup, 2 of these, And then I'm going to add the honey, and because I put oil in here first, it will slide right out. If you do a honey in a fresh measuring cup, you're going to have to get a spatula. So I've learned over the years, just go ahead and use the same measuring cup that had the oil. Think about it, it's all going in the same mix anyway. Spill it. You could see I was spilling a little extra honey in there, but I don't think that's going to be a problem. All right. This is a basic recipe for this wheat bread. You can add other things, and we'll talk about that later. One of the things, though, that I like to add is actually just very finely ground oatmeal. All right, we have added the salt and the honey and the oil, so we're going to turn it on so all the wet ingredients mix up. Usually run that about 30 seconds, and then we're ready to go. All of those ingredients are mixed together, and we're going to start adding the wheat flour. Now, I will say I'll probably have to do another batch in the machine of wheat berries in order to have enough flour to do this whole mix. I do add 12 to 14 cups of flour, and the reason why I don't have an exact amount on the flour cups is it always depends on the weather. It depends on if you're using this recipe and you live somewhere that's dry or the altitude's high, or if it's even wetter than where we live here, you're going to have to make an alternative plan. The key is that the bread dough is ready when it begins to pull around from the side of the bowl. And so we're going to begin adding flour here. And like I said, I think we've got probably about 12 to 14 cups, and we're going to make sure it's perfect and starts pulling away. Here we go. One of the significant things about using fresh ground wheat flour is that it has a lot of texture. And you can see here at the bottom of the container all the brown pieces and the wheat germ. And if you're looking at the dough, it's just got texture. It's kind of very, very dusty in here. That part you probably can't see on the video. But I'm going to go ahead and add the rest here. All right, it is definitely pulling away from the inside, and I'm going to take the top off so you can see better. There's very little dough around the edge. It's going to be some very perfect bread. So I'm going to take the bread hook off. I always keep my flour nearby because I do sometimes need it on my hands. I can use what's on the counter there, but your hands are going to need to deal with some wet dough here. So some people use oil when they're making bread and they're pulling things off. I just use flour. It's easy. It's right there. Easy to grab. Less mess. And so I'm going to grab all of the dough off the hook and then sort of get all I can out of here, and I'm going to start dumping it. It's heavier than you think, but this batch is going to make 4 really yummy loaves. All right, this part's really fun. This is one of my favorite parts of the dough, is that it's warm, it smells amazing, and I'm actually going to need to put my spatula in here and pull a little bit of the middle area away. I really don't like to waste food, so I probably use my spatula with these kind of things more than some might think is necessary. But I just want all the goodness in my bread. All right, if you are feeding a family or planning to share with others, this is about the time you get super excited because you've just almost got a bread loaf sitting in your pan. All right. Here you have a large, I'm going to make some space here. That is sometimes the problem, is space. So I've got flour on the counter that I cleaned the counter really well before I started making all this bread. And I have a big loaf of bread with this batch, and I'm going to make it into 4. So I'm going to squeeze it down the middle. Keep in mind, I have flour. I can add more here on the side. It's not a problem to have white flour at this point on the counter, which I have. And if you need more flour, just keep it nearby. So I have 2 parts. I'm going to break it into 2 more. I'm going to have 4 loaves here on the counter. I just squeeze it apart. It's kind of fun. Like you can tell, I don't measure my bread. Some people do that. That's fine. But I just kind of estimate. Maybe it comes from having a big family of my own and coming from a big family. That's just how we cook. All right, as you can tell, this is a very pretty loaf of bread. And I am going to grab a loaf pan over here and set my loaf into the pan. I have 4 of these that are identical, so I'm going to take each one of these rounds and put them into the loaf pans that are over here on the stove. All the while, they're going to be rising over on the stovetop. My bread will sit on the stovetop rising for about an hour. Again, I think you just watch that, and you can make alterations based on the temperature of the environment you're in. So don't be in a hurry to get it into the oven. I mean, everyone feels like they're in a hurry because they just want to eat it. It smells really good. But usually about an hour. You want to have it, you'll know, it'll look pretty. I'll show you what it looks like here as soon as these are pretty enough to look at. Well, look at these loaves. They look beautiful. These were set on the counter first. This is the second batch, and this one's right here is the third batch. Each of the ovens hold 4 loaves, and most ovens do hold 4 loaves, so we're going to put in 2 batches and start baking. We've preheated these 2 ovens to 350 degrees, and every oven will cook at different lengths of time, but these ovens put bread together perfectly in 35 minutes. When we first started talking about bread making, we talked about making bread with either the white flour or the wheat flour. And this loaf right here is one that we made with the wheat flour. And it is hot out of the oven. And as you can see, I've collected some yummy things for us to enjoy, for the family to enjoy. Some people might want honey. Others might just want butter. I mean, it's really great with hot bread and just butter. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and cut it off at the end, and you can see what it looks like inside. This bread is very, very soft, and it is very hearty. And just as another side note about this bread, it is very high in fiber. So if you or someone in your family really needs high fiber bread, this is the way to go. The best way to pay your cameraman/husband for filming as you do this bread making adventure is to butter up a piece of bread for him.
Let's try that. Mm-hmm. I've been eating this stuff for years.
Mm-hmm. He's pretty cute. Thanks for joining me today on this bread making adventure. Hopefully you're inspired to make homemade bread for your family. I'm Leah Simpson with Nurturing My Nest, all things home and family.